But you clicked anyway. Now there's no turning back.
The Nightmare Loop, ACTI, the anomaly. The rain lashed against the reinforced glass of Alara's fourth-floor apartment, sounding like static. At 29, Alara was one of the best audio forensics analysts in the state. Her job was to clean up the horrific, the tragic, and the condemned 911 calls, corrupted security footage, black box recordings. She lived in a world of soundproof foam and isolation. It was 11 p.m. Her desk was illuminated only by the harsh, blue glare of 3 monitors. On the screen was a single audio file sent over by a desperate detective from a cold case. The file name was simply n-loop_88.wave. It was recovered from a digital recorder found in an abandoned house where a woman had vanished without a trace. Alara slipped her heavy, noise-canceling headphones over her ears. The world outside ceased to exist. She hit play. At first, there was only the hiss of white noise. Alara's fingers danced across her mixing board, isolating frequencies, filtering out the background hum. Then, the sounds emerged. Tick. 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 A grandfather clock. Creak. Creak. Slow, deliberate footsteps on hardwood. Alara frowned. She lived in a modern apartment, but her floors were vintage hardwood. And she had an antique clock in her hallway. Coincidence, she thought, enhancing the vocal track. A woman's voice whispered through the headphones. It was choked with tears, hyperventilating. It's in the corner. It's looking at me. Please. God, it has no face. Alara's breath hitched. The voice was identical to her own. The exact pitch, the exact cadence. It's walking closer. It's dragging something. Through the headphones, Alara heard a wet, dragging sound. Squelch. Thud. Suddenly, terrified by the uncanny resemblance, Alara slammed the spacebar to pause the track. Silence filled her headphones. But in her apartment, behind her, the wet dragging sound continued for 1 extra second. Squelch. Thud. Alara froze. She pulled her headphones down around her.
The waveform is spiking. Something's wrong.
The Nightmare Loop, ACT2, the descent. Alara's eyes snapped open. She gasped for air, her heart hammering against her ribs. She was back in her chair. The monitors were glowing blue. The power was on. She checked the time. 11:11 p.m., just a micro-sleep, she muttered, wiping a sheen of cold sweat from her forehead. You're overtired, Elle. She reached for her coffee mug, but her hand trembled. She looked at the screen. The audio file n-loop_88.wave was playing on its own. The progress bar was moving, but she wasn't wearing her headphones. Yet, the sound was coming from the apartment itself. Tick. Tick. Tick, the grandfather clock in the hall. It sounded louder this time. Deeper. Creak. Creak, the footsteps were in the hallway. Alara stood up, her chair rolling back and hitting the wall. Who's there? I'm calling the police. She reached for her phone on the desk. The screen was dead. It wouldn't turn on. She grabbed her pepper spray from her purse and moved toward the studio door. She grabbed the handle and twisted, locked. From the outside, panic, cold and sharp, flooded her veins. She pounded on the heavy acoustic door. Help. Somebody, it's walking closer, a voice said. Alara spun around. The voice hadn't come from the speakers. It came from her own mouth. She hadn't meant to speak. Her lips had moved against her will, repeating the audio file perfectly. In the darkest corner of her studio, the shadows began to detach from the wall. It wasn't a person. It was a silhouette made of absolute void, its edges vibrating like television static. It was impossibly tall, its limbs elongated and broken at unnatural angles. It took a step forward. Squelch. Thud. The smell of rotting meat and ozone filled the small room. Alara backed up until she hit her desk. The entity raised a hand that ended in long, jagged needles. It lunged at her face. Alara screamed.
No, what? This guy! No!
ACT-3, the synchronization. Alara's eyes snapped open. She was sitting at her desk. The monitors were glaring. 11:11 p.m. She tried to jump up, but she couldn't move. Her body was entirely paralyzed. Sleep paralysis. She could only move her eyes. She looked at her reflection in the black screen of the middle monitor. She was wearing the headphones. She couldn't take them off. The audio file was playing. But it was no longer just sound. It was reality. The audio was a script, and her life was being forced to act it out. Through the headphones, the voice, her voice, wept, "I can't move. It's holding me down." The loop is getting shorter, out of the corner of her paralyzed vision. Alara saw the static entity. It wasn't in the corner anymore. It was standing directly beside her chair. She felt an agonizing pressure on her chest, as if a boulder had been placed on her sternum. The entity leaned over her. Where its face should be, there was only a swirling vortex of white noise. She felt an agonizing pressure on her chest, as if a boulder had been placed on her sternum. The entity leaned over her. Where its face should be, there was only a swirling vortex of white noise. She realizes she's dead, the voice on the tape said. Alara's own lips mouthed the words silently, forced into synchronization by the loop. No, Alara thought, her mind screaming against the paralysis. I am the analyst. I control the audio. With every ounce of willpower, she focused on her right hand. Move. Move. Her index finger twitched. The entity noticed. The static hissed violently, and the pressure on her chest increased until she heard a rib crack. Alara fought through the blinding pain. She threw her arm forward, smashing her hand onto the mixing board. She slammed the master volume fader all the way down and hit the record button. The paralysis broke. Alara grabbed the studio microphone on her desk, staring directly into the faceless void of the entity. I am waking up, she screamed into the mic, her voice clipping the audio meters into the red. The loop is broken. You do not exist, the entity shrieked, a sound like metal tearing and thousands of voices screaming in reverse. The frequency shattered the studio monitors. Glass rained down. The lights exploded, everything went black.
No, you get away! Who is that?
ACT-4, the final playback, the twist. Alara woke up. She was lying on her studio floor. The sun was streaming through the blinds, casting warm, golden lines across the room. The monitors were off, but intact. No broken glass. No smell of ozone. She sat up, rubbing her temples. A massive headache throbbed behind her eyes. A nightmare, she whispered, her voice hoarse. Just a massive, stress-induced night terror. She stood up slowly, her legs shaking. She walked to the studio door and turned the handle. It clicked open easily. She stepped out into her apartment. It was quiet, peaceful. The smell of fresh rain was in the air. She walked into the kitchen and turned on the tap to splash cold water on her face. The water felt incredibly real, shocking her senses awake. She turned on the small TV on her kitchen counter to get some background noise. The news was on, displaying a breaking news ticker, but the anchors were moving their mouths in complete silence. Alara frowned. She grabbed the remote and turned the volume up. Still nothing. She reached into her cupboard and grabbed a coffee mug. As she pulled it out, her hand slipped. The ceramic mug plummeted to the hardwood floor. It shattered into a dozen pieces, but it made absolutely no sound. Alara's breath caught in her throat. The world was dead silent. She touched her own throat and tried to scream, but no sound came out. Then, she felt it. The cold, heavy plastic of the noise-canceling headphones was still clamped firmly over her ears. She hadn't taken them off. Suddenly, a voice erupted through the headphones, deafeningly loud. It wasn't her voice this time. It was a distorted, demonic, radiostatic voice. Loop 89. Begin. The world around her plunged into total darkness. Tick. Tick. Tick.
If you love stories that stay with you after midnight, subscribe. More darkness is coming. Now, there's no turning back.